Hey everybody, welcome to God Thoughts from the Man Cave. I'm Loren Rosser, and this is my Man Cave. Today on the first video, I wanted to talk about God being love. We read in 1 John 4:8, whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. So right there, most everybody has heard that scripture, that God is love. But the question is, what exactly does that mean? So first you get some people, it basically could be twisted around that love is God. So it's just like this ethereal, mystical force that's love, and we all just feel good.
Feel the love.
Wow, man. Your positive love vibe is like strengthening my aura, man.
Then you have like the other extreme where you have like Christians who will say God is love, but then they'll turn around and say, yeah, and he's just angry at everybody, and he's stomping on people, and he can't wait to judge everybody, and he can't wait to pour out his wrath on everybody.
God is going to throw you in hell, you wretched sinner, and he loves you.
And the problem is we seem to have different definitions of what love is. So it's almost like people will say they believe that God is love, and most Christians believe that they're swimming in that understanding, as Steve Crosby would put it. But the whole thing is that we don't have a clear definition of what love is. The world's definition of love, you hear it in popular music, popular songs, in the movies, love hurts. Love stings, love is painful, and so there's this complete misunderstanding of what it even means for God to be love, because for a lot of people that's lost. You say God is love, well, I got hurt by love, so then God's going to hurt me. Or to a Christian, God is love, yeah, well, that means about as much as saying God has wrath, because it's like, well, he's love, but I've seen the stuff that he does. I've read the Old Testament. So there's this conflict about what it means for God to be love. So I want to take a look at that. So how should we define love? Well, I think there's a great place to turn to, which is 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 through 8. We read the popular love chapter that's been read at many weddings and things like that. People are very familiar with these verses. But Paul the Apostle wrote this, says, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it is not rude, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs, love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. So that's a pretty good definition of love, I would say. Wouldn't you agree? So, but here's the deal, okay? If God is love, then wouldn't it only make sense that that's the definition or the characteristics of God? See, because if God is love, that doesn't mean love is just something he has, or it's like a side dish, like you have dinner and you have your mashed potatoes and you have your chicken and you have your coleslaw. So it's kind of like people will view God as like God has love, but he also has wrath and he also has anger. But that's wrong. Love, what it's saying is love is the complete definition, defining characteristic of who God is. So let's define love so we can define God. Well, there's a simple way to do that. Darren Hufford actually pointed this out, so I don't want to take credit for this. In his book, The Misunderstood God, I highly recommend it, he showed how you could take 1 Corinthians 13 and replace the word love with the word God. Okay, so first you have God is patient. God's not on edge. He's not fuming. He's not sitting there waiting to pounce on people. Real patience is where you just completely keep your cool. You're not even moved by the situation. God has genuine patience because he understands us. He's not a volcano about to erupt. God is kind. He's a person of good and benevolent nature. His disposition is in a good and benevolent place. God does not envy. Hold on a second. This is the place where a lot of Christians give God the permission slip to excuse himself from the definition of love because they say, well, doesn't the Bible say God is a jealous God?
I'm a jealous God. So do as I say, not as I do.
Really? The one who is defined by love somehow excuses himself from the very definition of love? I don't think so. So let's take a look at this. First of all, when it talks about God being a jealous God, a lot of people are completely misunderstanding that. It's talking about in the sense of like a husband deeply desires and loves his wife and pursues his wife. That's what it's talking about, okay? But God is not envious of you. He's not jealous of you. The Greek word means to be heated or to boil with envy, hatred, or anger. God's not sitting there stewing in anger. He's not sitting there boiling over because he's so upset. You know, people will go so far as to say that, I mean, I've heard this, that like a child will pass away or something, and they'll make comments like, maybe God took my child because I loved him too much. Give me a break. You know, God is love. He delights when we love each other. He delights when we love people. That is the most ridiculous statement ever. And things like that, it's like people need to wake up and like go, no, that is like so off base. So that's not God. God does not boast. This is a big one. A lot of Christianity presents a boastful God. They present a God who's actually like almost insecure, and he's always making these statements to make himself look better, to pump himself up in front of everybody. I am God, hear me roar. You know, that's not God. He's not boastful. He's not trying to draw all the attention to himself. If God was trying to draw all the attention to himself, if God was a boaster, how come every day at sunset he doesn't come out and go,
Hey, all you atheists, look at what I did. Check me out. I'm so awesome.
You know, a lot of Christians do that and trying to beat up atheists or whatever with their, with their dogma and stuff. But that's not God. God's not that way. He's not insecure, and he feels no need to boast. When it comes to God, he's not trying to be the center of attention. You're his center of attention. We're the ones that he focuses on because he's love. He looks to the other. He's not boastful. He's not insecure. God is not proud. Another translation says God is not arrogant. And you know, this is a place I think a lot of Christians really miss it. The truth is, a lot of us at times present God as being arrogant. You know, you see it, so much of the worship services often, I'm sad to say, are based on that view. You know, we make statements like, God demands to be worshiped, and God requires your worship. So you're telling me God is arrogant because you're saying that God demands that you have to come around and tell him all the time how great he is. You have to come around all the time and stroke his ego. That he needs people to constantly fan all over him. That's arrogance. That's pride. That's not God. And so much of Christianity is based on that view that God is proud. And the other thing is, like, when you look at Jesus, who's God come in the flesh, when you look at Jesus, look at the life he came to live, how he came and lived in poverty, and he associated with the common people. Does that sound like a proud God to you? Now, people view that almost like it's God in disguise. Like Jesus is God putting on his disguise, so he's not being who he really is.
Check out my disguise. They'll never know I'm God now.
But did you know he was actually showing us God? He was showing us God's personality. And God's personality is to hang with the lowly. He doesn't mind being in poverty. God is humble. He's the exact opposite of pride. He enjoys being with common people. He enjoys being a nobody in the crowd. Whoa, there's a thought. You ever thought that God doesn't have a problem being a nobody? That's why we had to see him in Jesus, because with him being all-powerful and almighty, we couldn't understand that about him. God does not dishonor others, or some translations say God is not rude. Now think about that. Look at the way you see so many Christians converse with people they disagree with.
We'll see what you think, you liberal freak, after 1,000 years doing laps in the lake of fire!
But God is not rude. God doesn't dishonor people. God doesn't talk to people by saying,
"Hey, idiot! Get your act together, you lowlife moron!"
You know, that's not how God treats us. That's not how God talks to us. God is not rude.
Wait a minute. What about the way Jesus spoke to the Pharisees? Seemed pretty rude to me.
We'll get to that in a minute. But first I want to cover one other thing here also is as Darren Hufford pointed out, there's the word rude can also be translated in the Greek. It also means like coarse or unfinished. And that's another thing about God not being rude, that he doesn't leave things unfinished. See, today we have a lot of people who, you know, you'll see like a couple get together, you know, boyfriend and girlfriend, and they'll just go out forever and ever and ever and ever. And pretty soon the girl's going, "When are you going to put a ring on it?"
I don't believe in marriage.
Love sees something through to completion. There's a completeness in love. Love sees things to the finish line. And so love won't leave you out there hanging. So that's good to know that God also doesn't leave you incomplete. He's not going to leave you hanging out there forever. He's going to make sure that he completes that in us which he began. God is not self-seeking. God is the most unselfish being in the universe. You can see that in Jesus Christ, the way he served the people around him, the way they were the center of attention when he was around. That's how God is. God places you as the center of attention. His focus is on you, it's not on himself. God is not easily angered. Just like we saw earlier with God being patient. Once again, it takes a lot to get God upset. He's not going to fly off the handle. You know, in some recent Supreme Court rulings, I was hearing Christians say things like, "That's it! Oh, he's going to pour down his wrath now!" Like God is just sitting there, you know, in heaven. I hope the Supreme Court ruling doesn't go this way. Then all of a sudden it does, and he just goes, snap!
God angry! God smash!
God's not like so many of us humans that just lose it. He doesn't. He's not easily angered. God keeps no record of wrongs. You know, God's not sitting there keeping track of everything that you do wrong. And the way that so many Christians present it is like he is. Oh, he's forgiving, they say. But then they go around marking what everybody is doing wrong and keeping score. And the whole thing is, see, God is not keeping score. God's not keeping track of what you're doing wrong every day. He's not keeping records of where you blew it before or where you made that promise to him and went back on it and, you know, all these kinds of things.
God's keeping a list. He's checking it twice. He's gonna find out who's naughty and nice.
Don't you mean Santa?
You pagan!
See, religion is all about a score-keeping God. Because that's the only way religion can function. It requires that it has people jump through hoops and follow certain rules because there's a God there who's got his clipboard and he's keeping track of everything you do. Oh, you tithed. Check. Oh, they missed the tithe. No check. That's the God of religion. He's a scorekeeper. But see, God is not keeping score. He's not keeping records of wrongs. God does not delight in evil. It seems like after every major calamity that strikes this country, there's Christians who pop out of the woodwork who start saying things like,
"This is God's judgment. God is doing this."
Like after 9/11, there were some Christians who were saying that this is God's judgment on America. Or after the Sandy Hook shooting, there were Christians who were saying this is the result of kicking God out of school. You guys, God doesn't rejoice in evil. That's the exact opposite of love. Where was God during these times? He was grieving along with us. That's the heart of God. But God rejoices in truth. The interesting thing is Jesus made it clear that the truth is not a what, it's a who. It's Him. God delights in Jesus Christ. He's the revelation of all God is. That's why He is the truth. God always protects. Remember I said we'd get to the Pharisees when we were talking about God not being rude?
Yeah?
Well, here it is. The reason why Jesus was the way He was with the Pharisees is because He was being God, He was being love, He was being the protector. Jesus cared so much for the oppressed, the poor, the outcast, and those who had a heart to follow Him, that He could not sit by and let them get bullied. He couldn't sit by and let them be mistreated or taken advantage of, or His Father be misrepresented to them. So that's why Jesus was the way He was. It was love in action. He was moving as a protector. And see, that's a lot of what goes on in Christianity right now, that there's a misunderstanding that God is a protector. So a lot of times when people will say strong statements against a leader or a pastor or the status quo, it's viewed as, hey, man,
Can't we all just get along? Love, man, love.
But there's a part of God that when He sees people being oppressed, and He sees people being manipulated, and He sees people being controlled, and people being taught that He's something other than He is, that is going to damage or hurt them, there is if you will, a mama bear side of God that rises up and protects His cubs. And so you see that from time to time where God does step up, and it will come across sometimes as rude, but it's not rude for the sake of rudeness. It's because He loves the people, He loves us, and He's protecting us. Because God protects. Love always protects. God always trusts. He trusts in that which He put inside of you. He trusts in who He created you to be.
Wow!
God always hopes. God is the biggest optimist in the universe. He functions with absolute assurance that everything is going to work out in the end. God always perseveres. We see this in Jesus when He endured the cross and He endured the mockery. He persevered all the way through to the completion of the cross, through all the pain and through all the suffering. He was displaying God to us. And it's the same thing with Him today in our lives. He always perseveres. He doesn't give up on us. It doesn't matter how many times we blow it or we fail. He doesn't give up. He perseveres with us. He will never walk away from us. God never fails. His love will never fail. He always loves us all the time. And it's like how Paul wrote about, where can I go to escape the love of God? Where can I go to get away from His love? His love never fails. God always loves us. So looking at 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 through 8, we get a clear description of love. And what's interesting is you can replace the word love with the word God and get a clear description of God. Now, doesn't it only make sense that Jesus fits perfectly with that description of love? Because He is God, and the book of Hebrews says that Jesus is the exact representation of God. That's why He fits so perfectly with the definition of love. Now, the sad thing is, for a lot of Christians, their description of God actually goes more like this. God is impatient. God is selective in His kindness. God envies. God boasts. God is proud. He's arrogant. God is rude. God is self-seeking. It's all about Him. God is easily angered. He keeps records of wrongs. God delights in evil, particularly when it serves His purposes, and rejoices in selective truth. He doesn't always protect. He doesn't have any confidence in you. He basks in hopelessness. It's all just one big mess and it ain't getting any better. God gives up on people. His love has its limitations. Now what's interesting, when you look at that and you see that that's the way some Christians actually view God, what you have there is actually a description of Satan. Is it any wonder that so many Christians act like the devil?
Oh, so shocking. Who knew?